Hello, Brazil. It's such an honor to be back here at SatsConf, one of my favorite conferences. And I'm super happy to be here and joined by three amazing panelists. My name is Arsh Molu. I work at the Human Rights Foundation. And excited to get into this. Let's start with some brief introductions.
Hey, my name is Roger, and I've been writing about Bitcoin since 2014. I wrote the book Would Mao Hold Bitcoin on Bitcoin in China. And you can still see my writings on Forbes and sometimes Bitcoin Magazine.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jorge Jraissati. I am from Venezuela. I'm the president of the Economic Inclusion Group. And what we are trying to fight for, what we are trying to advance, is financial inclusion for everybody. We try to defend also Bitcoin in front of regulators because we believe that Bitcoin is prosperity, is human rights, and is the main tool we have to advance freedom.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Obrigado. My name is Jhanisse Vaca. I am from Bolivia. I work at the Human Rights Foundation. I am director of the Freedom Fellowship and other educational programs that support activists fighting for democracy and freedom in authoritarian countries. And I'm also the founder of Ríos de Pie, a nonviolence movement in Bolivia.
So on this panel, we have panelists from China, from Venezuela, from Bolivia. Let's talk about the Bitcoin landscape in each one of your countries and how it's looking these days and how it's being used there.
China's a really complicated situation. There's a kind of set of regulations that amount to a ban on mining and buying through most exchanges. When I talk about it to people, most of the time when I say is China is kind of like the red team of Bitcoin. It's been the country that's been the most advanced at trying to get Bitcoin out of the hands of its citizens and the most advanced at trying to replace, we just had a talk about central bank digital currencies, to replace that with the digital yuan or the eCNY, which is the world's most advanced central bank digital currency. So the current state in China, I think the coolest part about it is that even though there's been a lot of repression, there still is a lot of education that is happening in the space. Tomorrow I'm giving a talk where I'll go into more detail, but you can still find people educating. You can still find a lot of Chinese people who are buying Bitcoin. You can still find a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs involved in Bitcoin. I think that's a really inspirational thing, given how hard China, the country, has tried to keep Chinese people from purchasing Bitcoin and being part of the ecosystem.
As all of you know, in Venezuela, we are living in a dictatorship. Sadly, a couple of months ago, Maduro once again stole the election from us. We have right now almost 2,000 people in jail, mostly activists, young people. And the way or the reason that I started becoming involved with the Bitcoin community is that I understood the power of it. I understood that if we need to mobilize people, organize people, support people, the best way to do it is through Bitcoin. That's the way that we support activists in Venezuela. So for us, it's a necessity, but we need to do it more. Something that we are working on right now is to build a community of people in Venezuela, activists who also understand how to use Bitcoin, and we also want to teach them how to use Nostr, so that way they can organize themselves, they can communicate with themselves. Because just a couple of months ago, Maduro banned Twitter from Venezuela, he banned Signal from Venezuela, and we need to again be prepared to these measures. And of course, being here in Brazil, I'm also interested to know all of you, so if you see me after the panel, talk to me, because I want to understand also the situation here in Brazil and the way that you, as the people who are at the forefront of technology, are overcoming these issues here in Brazil, so that we can also do the same in Venezuela.
Thank you. In terms of Bolivia, which is a neighboring country, just so that you get an idea of the economic crisis that we're going through right now, which is very similar to what has already happened in Venezuela. This date, 1 year ago, the Bolivian peso to the dollar was around 6.9. Today, in the black market, it's up to 14 Bolivian pesos to the dollars, and it's likely to go up to 20 in 1 month. So we're going through a very bad economic crisis. There is no liquidity. People cannot take their money out of the banks. Because of this, there is not enough fuel, there is not enough food, there is not enough chicken, there is not enough meat in the market. We are also going through political turmoil thanks to former President Evo Morales trying to get back into power. This is causing even more economical instability. And this is, of course, something that, as I mentioned, happened in Venezuela and happened in Bolivia. And what we're seeing here is how the global banking system is failing citizens all around the world. But it's even more dangerous when you're living in an authoritarian country. A lot of people don't think that is the case in Bolivia, but I can tell you wholeheartedly that it is. Because you don't have the institutions and democratic mechanisms that allows for the changes that need to be implemented to take place. So what this leads is a lot of frustration. People cannot get their funding. They cannot spend their money, even if it's not done in cash. And this obviously leads to sometimes violent uprisings. You asked, sorry that I'm going for so long, but you asked what the situation is in terms of Bitcoin. It was illegal in Bolivia. Bitcoin was banned, and any cryptocurrency was banned in Bolivia back in 2013 or 12, I think. And it has just been made legal about 2 months ago, which means that the Bitcoin community, which already existed underground, is now becoming stronger. But I do say as a constructive criticism to our entire community that we need to do much more in terms of education, in terms of internet access, and in terms of indigenous language in order for Bitcoin to fully reach its potential in a country like mine.
Yeah, and I mean, this is why this crowd is so great, right? Because you're talking to them. You know, the educators are here, the developers are here. You know, the focus of this panel is talking about lessons from authoritarian regimes. So I'm going to keep it on you, Jhanisse, if that's okay. I want to learn more about your personal experience with financial repression, with using Bitcoin and other alternatives.
Let me start by saying that I don't have a bank account in Bolivia. Many activists have their bank accounts frozen in authoritarian countries. The institution that I work with, Standing Rivers, does not have a legal entity. We do not exist legally because in many authoritarian countries, if you exist legally, it means that the government is going to immediately arrest you because of the work that you're doing. And because we don't have a legal entity, we don't have a bank account as an institution, and therefore we cannot apply for funding from international funders, which means that working as a democratic activist in countries like our countries is incredibly challenging, not just because of what the government is doing to your people, but because the rest of the world doesn't have a system that is ready to support you. So in our case, we support firefighters that try to put out the fires in the Bolivian Amazon, and we are usually not allowed to bring money into the country. We're not allowed to buy protective equipment for firefighters. Currently, bank cards in Bolivia have a $35 US maximum per week or per month. And one pair of pants for a firefighter is $150 US. So with my Bolivian card, I wouldn't even be able to buy not even half of a pant. So what we're doing is we're getting funding from international donors through GoFundMe, and then sometimes we use that funding through Bitcoin to exchange it in whatever is necessary in order to buy what we need. And this is something that I really want to highlight of the work that we're doing, because a lot of people think of what authoritarian countries do in terms of political aspect, but humanitarian work is also not possible, just bringing food and water and basic things to people if you don't have the means to buy the things that you need to deliver. And thus, Bitcoin can play a huge role in humanitarian work in these countries.
And I mean, Jorge, this year alone, I mean, you personally, within your work and, you know, a lot of your family and friends on the ground in Venezuela, you've experienced this whole new shift in a regime and the importance of Bitcoin. Can you tell us a little bit about how your perspective is on that?
On the situation in Venezuela, on the way the regime is treating Bitcoin, these things. I mean, something that, for example, the most important thing, I believe, or one of the most important lessons that we got from this election in Venezuela is that technology became a battleground between activists and the regime. in the sense that the regime was taking away people's Signal, Twitter, but also start attacking more people that use Bitcoin. The regime also made Bitcoin mining illegal as well. So they clearly understand the power of the network. And in exchange, people have been using more and more. Similar to your situation, Jhanisse, NGOs in Venezuela cannot have registration, they cannot have a bank account. And the interesting thing is that also many NGOs that are from Latin America or from difficult territories, they find difficulties even having a bank account in the US or in Europe, also because of the failures of the financial system. So something that I would like to emphasize is how many human rights activists, NGO leaders in Venezuela, they cannot have a bank account in Venezuela because it will be weaponized against them, it will be used against them. But they can also not have a bank account in the US because of bad regulations in the US, because of excessive regulations against people that they consider high-risk people or organizations. The financial system just excludes them. In countries like Venezuela, what happens is that authoritarian regimes, they abuse recommendations made by international institutions on how to monitor NGOs. So for example, they use the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force, which is the international body that tries to regulate the integrity of the financial system. They use it against NGOs. There is something called Recommendation 8, which is the recommendation in the way they monitor NGOs. But they use it for political purposes. So they want to monitor NGOs to know who are their donors, to monitor what they do, to close them, to close their bank accounts, to freeze their assets. This is the reality in authoritarian regimes. So because of that, organizations in autocratic countries, the only way they have to operate is with Bitcoin. Many don't say it. Many don't say it also because in international institutions, sometimes international donors or foundations will be scared or will be less willing to donate, for example, if they say that they use Bitcoin. But we have to say it because it's the reality. We have to say it because if we don't protect our technology or tool, then we'll be done. Our movement will be closed. Freedom and human rights activists will not be able to operate. And that's why I think all of us, we are here, because we believe that we also need to spread the message internationally. So that way everybody understands that the main purpose of Bitcoin, or the main value of Bitcoin, is that it's empowering communities precisely at the places where we need it the most, in countries where people are unbanked. Most people in the world are unbanked. They cannot have a bank account. They cannot even open a bank account. Or if they have a bank account, they cannot use it. And that's a reality we need to face, because if people don't have even a place where to have savings, where to protect their hard labor, their work, then what kind of market economy we can build? I come from Venezuela. I saw how the savings of my friends, of people I know, were lapidated because they put currency controls, and the same can happen in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept of Bitcoin being used in those environments is it kind of sticks with you, right? It's like this thing where, okay, Bitcoin is not just this thing, right? Like it actually works in these environments, and bringing it back around to China, right? The country where Bitcoin was banned pretty much every year for the past decade, right? So I mean, Roger, tell us about the scene in China right now with, when it comes to CBDCs, capital controls, social credit scores, just let it all out.
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing, just echoing back on Jorge's point about capital controls, a lot of people ask me, is Bitcoin going to change the Chinese party state? I think, is the Chinese Communist Party, why are they so adamant on restricting Bitcoin, right? Where does this fear come from? And I spent a lot of time reporting on the Hong Kong protests. I was actually on the ground when they were happening. And I was trying to figure out, if there was this clean narrative that, hey, like, people on the ground were using Bitcoin in order to be resilient against the Hong Kong government and the central authorities. And so in Hong Kong, you started seeing things like bank accounts being frozen, activists and people who are running for pan-Democrat primaries being arrested. The ability to have people's transit cards tracked and surveilled by the police. So I thought the simple narrative would be that people would use Bitcoin to be defrayed against that. I did see a few instances, and there were some trading desks that raised funds in order to give water bottles to the protesters and things like that. But they used Bitcoin Cash, didn't use Bitcoin. But anyways, and there are, for example, Hong Kong Free Press, which was this pro-freedom, pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong, which is still operational right now, did take funding in Bitcoin. They had a BTC Pay server set up for a while. But what I always tell people is the most meaningful thing the Chinese Communist Party fears is the ability for people to leave the system, for the ability to people to be able to choose what to do with their money when they are able to earn it in the way that they have. And China is a prime example of a country that has so many restrictions, 50,000 USD per person per year on how much foreign currency you can buy. And yet you see Chinese people, they are mining Bitcoin, they are buying Bitcoin, and they are able to contravene these capital controls. That is the one thing the Chinese government fears the most, is that the Chinese people need to find ways to get their savings out of the system, and Bitcoin does partially enable that in a way that can't be tracked, can't be censored, and can't be surveilled.
Yeah, and I mean, a dictator thinking about the use of Bitcoin, it's probably one of the most insecure things, right, in the regime. Now, you would think that if this is something that's being completely, repetitively banned over and over and over again, not just in China, and in Bolivia as well, you think the use would skyrocket. So how are you looking at the underground usage of Bitcoin and people are still transacting in Bitcoin and stable coins as well?
Well, China, it's really difficult with public stats because it's illegal to trade yuan for Bitcoin or for Tether. So you're not going to see public stats that say this is how much volume there is. The best information we have is both qualitative and quantitative. On the quantitative side, Chain Analysis has for a while partnered with some of the trading desks that mostly convey this gray zone of trading. And what we see from that is that the volume of inflows that those platforms are reporting is much higher. It's almost at all-time highs now. And so we can see from that Chinese people are able to buy, and they are buying at scale. I'm probably not going to have enough time to go into detail on how all this is happening, but suffice it to say that even in a country where exchanges are banned, there are a lot of ways around that, whether that's using a VPN, whether that's putting a fake address or a geographic address outside of China, whether that's working with OTC trading desks that are kind of like private counters. But what we see is demand for Bitcoin is strong. It's getting stronger because the Chinese government has made many poor financial and economic decisions that are coming to roost right now. There's a massive property market bust. And also, Chinese shares are down. For some people, they're reporting losses of 60, 70% of their portfolio. So something like Bitcoin, and admittedly a lot of the trade is in Tether, is very, very appealing, even though the Chinese government has tried its hardest to restrict and ban. So I wouldn't quite say it's skyrocketed. After the bans, which really happened in 2021, there was definitely a dip in volume. But what we see with the qualitative, quantitative information is there's plenty of ways around that. Bitcoin was built to be resilient against all these different levels of restrictions, and it's still working to get interest and demand from Chinese people who are very much still a part of the Bitcoin story.
Yeah, and bringing it back to Jhanisse, when you mentioned dictators cracking down on bank accounts, censoring transactions. How did this all come together? What was the theme of how dictators are financially repressing people?
Dictatorships thrive on making citizens feel like the only options they have in order to regain democracy are either to become violent because they frustrate them enough and they take away from them any institutional means that are peaceful and democratic, such as rule of law, the capacity to mediate, the capacity to have dialogues. They take all of that away so that people feel that the only way they can reclaim their freedom is through violence. Because, of course, dictatorships are usually the ones that have control of the military, the police. They have more training, they have more resources, they have more people, and they want people to get violent because then they have the excuse to either shoot and kill or repress, arrest, and completely get rid of any uprising. Or the other option is for people to just self-censor, feel like they have no power, they cannot do anything, and thus they decide to just stay home, mind their own business, and not try to confront the dictatorship. And when you take away people's capacity to simply buy or sell things, to have some sort of agency over their day-to-day lives, and they feel that even to bring food to their homes, they need to submit to the financial system of the regime, and they need to behave in ways that the regime wants them to behave so that they don't have their financial freedom taken away from them. That is one of the most effective, not only financial ways of repression, but it is a psychological tool by itself. So this is why I am so passionate about Bitcoin and Nostr, as you very well said. Nostr, I think, is a future of the work that activists are doing, at least. Because we have to understand Bitcoin not only as a current tool that empowers a lot of people, but as perhaps the most important tool that needs to adapt to the needs of people that are fighting for freedom today in order to fight authoritarian regimes where it hurts them the most. The reason people stay in power and they become dictators, it's not because just because they have huge egos, which most of them do, but it's because they want to retain money. They want to be able to have nice cars, to say that they're the most rich person in the country, to send their kids to school in expensive universities, all of this horrible things that dictators do. So what they want is funding. It's not even about ideology. It's about money. It's about stealing money. So if you can somehow create a parallel system that escapes what they can control and that empowers people in a way that no one can shut down, that is the most important thing. But again, Bitcoin will only, from my perspective, hit the full of its potential in terms of liberating people once we understand that Bitcoin is a tool, but the end goal is freedom. And there are many other ways to achieve freedom, such as on-the-ground activism, humanitarian work, and Bitcoin needs to be able to meet the needs of the people doing all of this work instead of just becoming something that a few communities know and use. Because otherwise, it would be as if we've been given the most important tool in this moment of humanity's history, and we're not putting it to the use that it needs to be used in order to change the course of humanity.
I mean, and Jorge, I mean, you've started an entire, organization around this very concept. I mean, how have you seen financial repression start to manifest, and dictators censoring bank accounts, and that theme going over the past years?
Yes, we need to, as you mentioned, we need to bring Bitcoin and these tools to the majority of people, especially young people. In Venezuela, most activists do not know how to use it, do not know how to use Bitcoin, do not know how to use Nostr, and they don't know that without these tools, we will not be able to take down Maduro. We will not be able to make a change in the country. Because, as you mentioned, dictators, they have resources, they have the monopoly of the state and the violence of the state. They are always dictating the agenda against activists. And all the time, opposition movements, they are reacting to the attacks coming from the state. In this case, I believe that we have the chance to be at the forefront. And I believe we have the chance to actually change the landscape and change the way that we are fighting this fight. Because whoever controls money, controls information, the flow of communication, has the advantage. Before this technology existed, people were actually not able to circumvent the system. They were not able to protect their assets. It was extremely costly. It it was extremely difficult. But thanks to these tools and thanks to this technology, we can actually reverse this trend. It's not an easy thing to do because often people who are at the forefront of technology, they are not involved, let's say, in activist movements. So I think something we have to do more is to connect these communities. Something that we're also, for example, working to do in Venezuela is to connect people who are very high on their tech expertise, but also connect them with people who are experts on energy, on economics, on public policy. Because only by making this marriage and by making these connections is that we can also understand the new use cases and the new ways that we can actually make changes. And this is work we have to do in Venezuela, outside Venezuela, everywhere. This is the way to make mainstream these technologies and these tools. And again, the people who are right now listening to us are the people who are at the forefront of technology. So my call to action is to reach out to us, to talk to people that are not from, I'm not a software developer, I don't come from this technical expertise. What I want is to use this technology to help people, to empower people, especially leaders who are desperate for tools, real tools that can make them more effective and that can make them more impactful.
Yeah, I mean, and just a closing question, starting with Roger and going down the panel. What's something that you want to leave the audience with to tell them about your work, right? Whether, it's what keeps you going, your call to action. Tell us something that we should know.
Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to Nostr as well. I think I would love for everybody to know that there are Bitcoiners around the world, and there's so much power in finding people who embrace and who love Bitcoin and freedom tech, who are using it actively. One of the things that gives me the most hope is there are Chinese cypherpunks on Nostr who are teaching each other how to surpass the Great Firewall, how to surpass the most advanced surveillance state of our times. And I just encourage all of us to either watch that dialogue. Tomorrow's talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about which MPubs I recommend people to follow, as well as participate in that, get to know the context of how all this is happening. And, I think there's a lot of people, Free Ross Day 1. I also want to give a shout out to Free the all of Hong Kong 47, and Free Jimmy Lai as well, who all unjustly imprisoned during the Hong Kong protests.
My call to action to people who are here is a personal one. It's an individual of every single one of you. We come from countries in which we are told that we cannot dream. We are coming from countries in which being successful is extremely difficult. Making money is extremely difficult. We live in countries in which politicians are all the time trying to take away our opportunity to become successful. They are inflating our currencies, taking away our property, creating crazy narratives about the way the economy should be built. That can be extremely challenging and that can be extremely difficult for young people because we want to have families, we want to own a home, we want to have businesses, we want to be successful. My call to action to all of you is that doesn't matter how difficult it is, doesn't matter how many challenges you face, you are here for a reason. And you are here right now with other people that are doing their best, that are at the forefront of technology. Use that. Build connections, build momentum, work extremely hard. And if you do that, doesn't matter how difficult, doesn't matter how many politicians want to stop you, you will be able to make a change. So take time in this conference to meet people, to brainstorm, use it to make connections, and you will see that in a year, when you come back here, you will have success and good businesses.
Jhanisse, close us out.
That's tough to follow, the two of you. I think Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. I'm from Bolivia and I love Brazil. You have such a beautiful country. And being from the region, I know that this is a complicated moment in many of our countries in terms of freedom and democracy. So my first call would be to the fact that we need to unite more as a region. I know that there are many Brazilians in my country. I don't know how many Bolivians you've met here in Brazil. But one of the ways where we can unite and be of more help to each other, especially for a country like mine where Bitcoin has just become legal, so we're beginning to explore all the things that we can do now that we won't go to prison for having a wallet. I think one of the best ways to unite is to be of service to each other. And in that sense, I will cheat and I will ask you, if you want to be of help for activists all around the world, but in Latin America, in the uses that we can give Bitcoin in our region, please reach out to my colleague Arsh Molu, who is on stage and will be on the conference. We will be here tomorrow as well. And let's connect. Let's meet each other. Let's create friendships. I think that's the best way to start working relationships and see what we can do, because I really think that us learning from your experience and also sharing with you what we've been doing with Bitcoin could be very beneficial for the region as a whole.
And let's get one final round of applause for the panelists. Obrigado.